Yes.
Okay, great. No, so welcome all of you. I think we have a few people coming in, dribbling in, but we're going to get started. So this is a joint initiative from smartlab.network under Tim, SiLA Consortium, and Oxford Global, who are organizing this conference. So this is the first of 3 events. Today we've got, have you got the full slide? Yeah. So we're going to focus on digitalization. So we've got 3 great speakers for you. Burkhard Schäfer is going to kick off, and then we're going to hand over to Rekha from Abhishek from Bayer. They're all going to give you different perspectives on digitalization and the challenge. And then we're going to go to a question and answer session with the panel. So if you've got any questions as you hear the speakers, please hold on to them until we've heard from all of them. And then we'll open up the microphone to everybody and go from there. So I'm going to hand over first of all to Burkhard Schäfer, who's a long-term member of the SiLA community, also leads the Animal Project, and also has his own company, splashlake. So Burkhard, I think I'm going to hand over to you now.
Great, thanks, Patrick. We're now going to try to get the presentation up on the screen here. We do have a little issue with Chrome here. I think I'll have to quickly rejoin.
Okay, it worked fine when we did the rehearsal, honest.
But, yeah.
Try one more time. We all know this, but
yeah, we've tried different platforms, but we finally ended up on Chrome, which used to work quite reliably, but
I think the issue is that, Tim, you're still sharing. Would you mind unsharing?
Oh, sorry, I thought you could just kick me out. No.
Maybe because you're the boss. Maybe that's why you have to tell us. Okay. And now it lets me. Thank you so much.
Sorry, my bad.
That did the trick. So I think we should be doing fine now, right? Can you see this?
Yes.
All good.
Okay, wonderful. Great. So thanks again for the invitation to contribute today. And I just wanted to frame this topic from data discovery and look at digitization opportunities from a standardization perspective. On the one hand, from the perspective of SiLA and Animal as organizations that help contribute with standards, but also from a perspective of a vendor that builds solutions. Why does it make sense to bet on standards, and how does that help us all create a digital ecosystem in our labs? And so I think a good way to start this conversation is to think about the life cycle of data in a lab environment. And the traditional play was always, let's do some experimentation, right? So we do the data generation, and then we capture all of that data, we represent it appropriately, we store it somewhere, and then eventually we can talk about how we apply that data, how we use it, how we exploit it. And I mean, as we all know, everyone loves talking about this part because this is the interesting bit, right? So this is where you can drop your AI and ML buzzwords, and where you can really see the things. Yeah, it's visual. You can take action on the results, and that's beautiful. But in order to do that, we know we've got some work to do. So we really need to start here. We need to think about how do we generate the data appropriately? How do we manage it? And that will then allow us, it'll form the digital baseline for being able to do that. And in today's day and age, we think even further, because whatever we get out in terms of data interpretation, we might feed into what comes next, right? So at that point, we are closing the loop, and we then use different technologies such as machine learning or foundational models, including large language models and others, to define future process parameters and then to inform what we want to do next. Yeah. So at that point, again, the data generation and the data management piece are a very important part. And obviously, this is also where standards can play a role, where SiLA 2 as a communication standard can greatly facilitate the experiment execution, the instrument control, so that we don't have to build bespoke interfaces here. And then once we've had the big bang of the generation of the data, the execution of the experiment, we deal with the fallout, and that's the data. So at that point, being able to create data packages that span multiple types of instrumentation, I think that's really, really interesting. And if we are looking at this type of a closed loop approach, or even if we only have these 3 steps without the closed loop, we notice that we have different types of orchestration that needs to happen for this to work. Because here in the data generation, we are talking about the traditional automation orchestration bit. And when it comes to the data management and assembling a reusable data package, that is data orchestration. And those are different types of skills and different types of tools that I need in order to do that. So let's drill down on these and really think about how can we complement this well-known automation orchestration bit with a data orchestration approach that complements that nicely. Because we kind of have an existing landscape here where we have kind of a multi-layered system. So at the lower level, we have the local automation orchestrator or a scheduler, right, which drives the equipment and which is either using standards or proprietary drivers to control the equipment. And during the run, it produces files, and there are a couple of examples on the market for systems that do that. And then we've got some things on top. So we might either have a workflow engine on top, or even at the highest level, things like ELN, LIMS, design of experiment tools, method design tools, things like that. And that's the existing landscape. What they do is they make the model train run, right? So at that point, we can get the instruments to move. We can get the experiments conducted. So what does data orchestration then bring to the table here? Data orchestration basically puts a couple of little vacuum cleaners next to each instrument that are participating in such an automated flow. And it collects the instrument data during the run, and it assembles a run data package from the individual data sets that come from the instrument, ideally already in a standard format, maybe has to be converted on the fly so that we can normalize that content and really do something with it. It will also integrate with other consumers for that data package, whether that's LIMS, ELN, or some type of a data store or analytics package. And it will then also allow for visualization of that integrated run data. And this gives us a well-defined and reproducible path to things like data analytics and closed loop. And some aspects of it will be generic in nature, and we can apply patterns that make that scalable. And sometimes they will be specific to the measurement technique, the process technique, or even the concrete workflow. So at that point, we're talking about data orchestration that nicely complements the automation that we are all already familiar with. So we see that as a big opportunity. And what that allows us to do is it gives us rich instrument data at our fingertips, because now we no longer just get a couple of Excel files and text files coming out of a run, but depending on the type of instrumentation that is participating, we are getting a rich data package that is then also in open formats, and that can be visualized and that can be repurposed in a number of ways. And that means different types of data, whether it's chromatography, whether it's time series data, and then we exploit that content in a number of ways. What we can then do is we can think about how can we evolve this to a common blueprint for sustainable lab data. And you have seen, I assume, a circle like this or a very similar one where you start with the overall life cycle. So you've got your experiment planning that you do in leading systems. You have the execution, that is the work that's being performed in the lab. You have the data capture from the instrument. You normalize it into a common format. In our case, that would be animal, obviously. We enrich it with metadata so that we get context. And then we have data visualization and analytics, which can then lead to planning of additional experimentation. And if we are talking about automation and potentially having multiple pieces of equipment involved, even if it's on an automated work cell, we find that this might actually, especially that execution bit, might actually decompose into a number of separate life cycles of its own that operate locally on specific instrumentation. And so at that point, we see these individual runs take place on different pieces of equipment, and we need to assemble that to a more complete data package. And so that assembly of that data package is actually quite interesting because it allows us to to do things that actually track the full workflow in terms of a material flow and a data flow through the automation platform. And what we've done here is we've taken an example of a formulation recipe that includes a couple of different steps in order to make a particular batch. And here we can see the different operations in yellow and the different samples or ingredients that get used. We see those in white. All of these get added to a particular batch that has been formulated, and then eventually that goes into measurements. And then those measurements could be part of a chromatography sequence. So those samples are then injected. We have detection on it. We have results coming on it, and so on. So we no longer just look at individual results, but we see them connected. So we see the big picture. And this is obviously the baseline if we want to train machine learning models, and if we want to do any kind of predictive work. And the nice thing is about these data packages, what we're looking at here is just animal files, right? They can then be propagated on to other areas. So in this case, we have a LIMS, and we can actually bring the data that comes from the individual experiment into the LIMS UI. And here we need to look at how we then bring the data to the point of use rather than the user coming to the place where the data lives. So that's a different way of thinking. And part of that is also, how do we deal with these different types of automation? Yeah, but also how do we make that work in the analytical world? So we just looked at it from the automation and high throughput perspective. Let's look at the traditional analytical lab where we might be doing chromatography, spectroscopy, and so on, where we have chromatography data systems where we want to generate sequences and so on. So SiLA is also doing work there together with Animal, where you might have a leading system such as a LIMS, an ELN, or SAP, and a chromatography data system on the other side. And you want a proper way of them to talk to each other. So what we're doing here is we're exposing the capabilities of the chromatography data system as a SiLA service. So you can discover your instruments, you can see what methods are available, you can submit samples as sequences, you can amend them, you can get the status of instruments and so on, but also generate a traceable result data package. And the way SiLA works is SiLA has this notion of feature definitions. So you can experience, you can discover the capabilities that an instrument offers over the network. So here I can see, this is instrument discovery. I can see what instruments are connected, which methods are there. I can read the sequence, I can submit new sequence elements and so on. And in the end, I can get results back. And now we have that implemented for a couple of CDSs. I want to show you some examples here. Where, for example, in Chromeleon, you started at the LIMS, you said, these are the things that I want to measure. It comes up with the sequence, and then it does the run. And in the end, you've got your chromatogram, and that is then exported again as a data package. And now we have the equivalent of that data package in animal format, which can now be looked at in any web browser, which is really cool, right? So you can really close the loop. And this is the same data format that we just used for the high throughput automation. And that obviously makes it nicely scalable. Or if we're not in Chromeleon, let's say here's another example from OpenLab CDS2 from Agilent. And so this is how we can get the sequence built. And here's a chromatogram on the Agilent side. And then this is what that also looks like on the animal side, also with peaks and with baselines and peak demarcations and so on. And that can then obviously also, again, taken further into downstream consumption, let's say, again, by a LIMS system. So in this case, we've taken the same data, we've put it into LabVantage, we've put it into Labware with the embedded visualization. So here's kind of the idea that if we put that all together, we can really assemble a nice story around a sustainable digital lab, because we have a common way to talk to our instruments with SiLA 2, a common way to represent our instrument data with Animal. We have seen how we can track material and process flow. And we also get a nice view on our resource consumption and utilization, because that's all passing by in front of us. And that also gives us new ways of leveraging our data again and again. So the big question is, how do we get there? Because it would be nice for all of those standards just to be universally applicable and available. And that's not the case yet. We need to work with the vendor community to generate more and more adoption. And for that to work, we said, well, how can I get my instrument data into an animal format? How can I get a SiLA driver for my instrument? And here, what we've created, and that's obviously now with the vendor hat on, we've created a pool of converters and adapters that is maintained by a dedicated development organization. And so interested users can join the pool. They get access to the entire pool at no extra cost, and the development is then co-funded. Yeah, so if anyone who needs a particular driver, they can get together with others. We then spread the load of doing that. The resulting adapter goes into the pool that everyone else has access to. Yeah, so that is then maintained as a product and is fully supported also as a software as a service with a service level agreement. And also, yes, somebody is there to fill in your cybersecurity questionnaire. And the nice thing is that such a shared cost model makes standards-based integrations less expensive than the proprietary custom integrations that we need to do today. So the idea is to get that scalability not only from the capability perspective of what the standards allow us to do, but also from a commercial perspective, because that the total cost of ownership of such a solution is actually greatly reduced, and we can bring those standards to fruition in our lab environment. And I think that is that's sort of a quick perspective of how SiLA and Animal can complement our digitization efforts in drug discovery, drug development. And that's it from my side. And so I'll hand it back to Patrick, and we can do Q&A toward the end of the webinar. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Burkhard. That's very nice. We've only given you a few minutes, but it sets the scene. So I'm going to hand over now to Abhishek. Abhishek, are you with you? You with us?
Yep.
Can see you. Right. Do you? I've got your slides. Do you want to show them, or do you want me to show them?
You can share them.
Okay. Okay. So Abhishek is one of the speakers at the event in June in Basel, the Oxford Global Discovery and Development. We've only giving Abhishek a few minutes here to give us all a taster of what he's talking. So I don't want to steal all his thunder. You've got to go to the event in order to hear his whole story. But in the few slides he's got, if I can just find them, he'll tell you a little bit about what he's doing, and you'll see that links back a little bit to what Burkhard was telling us earlier. So hang on, now I've got to navigate this thing.
Maybe one quick side note. So if there are questions, please keep the questions for the end. So we'll have a question answer session at the end to make sure we stay in time.
Okay, we got this. Can you see the slide?
No, not it.
What am I doing? Ah, okay. And now.
Yep, sure.
Okay, I'm going to go full screen, and then you're on. Whoops, let me go to the beginning. Okay, Abhishek, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Hi all, I'm Abhishek Choudhary. I'm working as a principal engineer in Bayer Pharmaceuticals in RWD Global Commercial Department. Before that, I used to be part of evidence generation. Technically, I'm still doing evidence generation, but now more on the commercial side. My objective here is to not replacing anything, but automate as much as we can with the modern technologies. So if you go to the next slide, what we are doing is we are revamping the complete real world evidence of inside Bayer, and we are bringing it to more with a software centric approach where all the data is accessible, all our tools are integrated, and that can be used. And for example, if in any internal tool is being built, we want it to be used, but a user need not to know about it. So they will just ask a question like, get me a patient population with this criteria. And behind the scene, most of the work we want to automate. That's the core objective. To do that, we are, of course, leveraging AI with generative AI, a lot of engineering and pipeline and automations. And what we are doing is we are adding quite a lot of governance on top. So based on your login, we go to a governance engine and which decide this particular user, even if it asks a data which is not being accessible by the user, authorized by the user, it should not show that. So that's the main control. So building on top of that with a very high regulation and governance is the most essential part. And that is the first layer on our platform we are building to make things easier. So we work with researchers, statisticians, epidemiologists, and many different, and even from when we collaborate with the different team companies, universities, we have a different kind of user journal. So for that, we are creating a next layer, which is called avatars. If you go to the next slides, it's a glimpse of what it is you can see. So what we call it is a RWD workbench, where you get many things. So for example, this is one of the agent chats. These are avatars. So a data analyst avatar, a writer, epidemiologist, critical thinker, research assistant. So what it does is all these avatars currently being triggered with a dynamic prompting. So it understand behaves. I talk to researchers. I try to understand how they work, and you can imagine I mimic an avatar out of it by creating prompts. But what happens when the researchers are testing, or if somebody's using and they are giving a negative feedback that this answer doesn't seems all right, or it is nothing to do with what I'm asking, it goes back to the researchers for validation. We have a layer called validations, which validate and try to understand what went wrong, what they desired and what didn't work out, and then we optimize that layer. So this entire protocol, you can select a different kind of agents here, like researchers, and you start asking questions. Right now, you can imagine it's an alpha stage where it gives you, uh, you can go 20-30% of the steps. But over the time, based on feedback and learning and unlearning, we anticipate that we can go close to 60% of the tasks, which can be already answered by it. This engine has connection to everything: our data warehouse, our internal library, our protocol, our studies. And based on the person who logged in, it understand what and what cannot be done, what kind of answer this particular person can ask. Even these agents are, some of the agent are selected based on the particular user. High profile user will get all the agents, some won't even get it. Researchers won't get the agent of engineering because they don't want to directly interact with engineering and find the code. It is not logical. So that's one of the agent we have. Another agent which is not getting in the screenshot is data insights, where we are not technically solving your entire question. We are giving you insights of the data, again in the glimpse. So we know text to SQL. We know LLMs are good at generating SQL. But in our area, it is just not the SQL we work with. We have our internal tools which need to go through it. Then we have more additional layer of optimization on top of those. So what we are doing is, inside this engine, everything, like as Burkhard explained, we have an orchestration framework inside, which based on the question understand which tool to trigger, which library to add into this engine, which virtual environment it goes, and then it gives you a viable answer what you are actually looking for. And again, it's a feedback model. We will still go wrong because it's a hallucinating model. So it does the less hallucination. What we are doing is we are creating a validation engine layer on top of it. So just to be clarify, we are not targeting here to give you a response in a seconds. We are targeting here to give you a response maybe in a 5-minute window. But those things would have taken maybe weeks for you now. So it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes is still awesomely good. But what we do is all this process validation is very visible to the user. They can see what is happening, why it takes time, where the status is. And then they get all the steps and all the responses. That this is what we can, and this is our journey. That's how we found this answer. This give a traceback model. So you can say workflow model, where you can say this happened, this particular data set happened, this library they used, and that's how they, so same like Odyssey and any other data set they want, and what kind of data they are using, those optimization is done here. And that way we are integrating more and more tools to it. So you can the target is to find out how much we can automate, not to replace anything. So we don't believe that we can replace we cannot do automate the entire RW cycle, but we can already do many things which are repetitive. So we find repetitive patterns, and we are trying to engineer that. We are trying to integrate that, and we have this single window login where you find every information. So if any new tools come, I need not to tell you. You can just go to the tools and you can find what is available, and then you can add as an integration and start chatting. So it is not a collection of one tool. So it is a collection of many different tools. It's just that you need not to do the work of integration. The same thing with RStudio. We have a hosted environment, so it's in a browser. It runs on the browser. We are using WebAssembly for some kind of layer which actually open in your browser the UI. So you want an analytics, we use some open source dashboardings, but you need not to know it. You just say, get me the count of number of user doing blah blah blah. It just gives you the chart to you, and then you can do interaction. And you can say, no, I want the hosted one, so that gives you a link. So those are the works we are trying to automate with the entire cycle of RWDI, and this is what I'm going to talk about in the conference. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Abhishek. I'm going to take off there. Right, so as I said, hold on to questions. We'll hear first of all from our last speaker, Rekha from AstraZeneca. So Rekha, I think you're on the first day. You're giving one of the opening keynotes and chairing a session. So I know a little bit about what you're going to talk about just in a few minutes. So I hand over to you. Do you want me to bring up your slide?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, let me go and find it.
So while you're doing it, hello everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity. And I'm quite excited to be part of this and also participating in the conference, and looking forward to it. So just a little bit about me. I head I'm the global head of data office with AstraZeneca. And prior to that, I worked in different sectors, performing similar roles with respect to IT and data, spanning over about 19 years of experience. So what I'm going to talk about in terms of from the conference is in the keynote speaking is how we could leverage AI and data to support the innovation and the bench to patient, right? Not just only from the drug discovery, but expanding it beyond. And that's what I'm currently working in AstraZeneca, because we have various aspects, right? I think it's not AstraZeneca or the only ones in that, like in any global organization, they have to deal with multiple challenges, whether respect to commercialization, respect to the discovery and tech transfers, and also leveraging, reaching to the market in a quicker manner. And the traditional process is no longer viable. I will not say it's not valid, but the traditional process is not going to be viable. And I know in last 3 weeks, many of you experienced in terms of this, the tariffs episodes. And almost all the companies have to scramble through in terms of how we could build these resilience in terms of the supply chain in spite of all these challenges. So we need to look for more digitalization opportunity, but at the same time, we also have to streamline the process. So we are looking at both aspects, right? Where we can seize the opportunity to digitalize, we are seizing that. I mean, we are looking at that, working through leveraging the AI. But we are also looking at in terms of streamlining the process, because if you are not going to do it, it is also going to be a huge hassle, especially from the global organization. And I also would like to cover the other aspect as well is not just with the geopolitical risks which we are dealing with, but many countries right now, there is a regulatory criteria has been enforced, which we need to be factored in with respect to the data, like how the data can be shared across regions, because that needs to be seamless when you have to work on in terms of the end-to-end. But we also need to factor in terms of how to accommodate the regulatory criteria has been enforced by different countries, which also enforces different set of challenges. So I think we are in the interesting era, I have to say that. And not only the data needs to be trusted, but the data also need to be AI ready, so that, like Burkhard and Abhishek talked about, in terms of how we can build these agentic AIs, right, with the different personification, and how can we get the access to the data sets much more quickly, and we could trust that information. So that's the effort which we are currently working in AstraZeneca. I wanted to just give a kind of a flavor in terms of in my keynote, in terms of how we could come up with amicable proposal, right, or amicable solution in terms of addressing these challenges, but also exploiting the opportunities or the challenges, right, converting these challenges into as an opportunity where we could excel in terms of these product launches, the divestments or switches, covering the entire breadth of the product supply chain or the product life cycle, just from the discovery to the patient value chain. So that's the glimpse which I'll be covering in the conference. With that, back to you, Patrick.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rekha. Okay, so you've heard there 3 different perspectives, 3 different talks, different levels of granularity. I'm going to open the floor up to questions. Who have we got? We've got lots of thumbs up, which is delightful to see. Do we have any actual questions?
Yeah, I mean, I would have one, of course. Especially, it's actually to all of them. So first to Burkhard. So if I wanted to get started with animal, I mean, this is really like, of course, what we all dream of, that you have animal, you put all your data in the animal container, and then you can feed it directly into the AI, and you've got all the metadata, all the raw data all together, and the AI can start to train or predict stuff. So is there a pipeline? Is there anything prepared one could use to not start from scratch every time?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that you need to look at. Obviously, what you're describing is an entire life cycle, right? So you start somewhere at the data generation, you run your experiment. At that point, you need a way of ingesting the data and doing the normalization, the animal conversion, right? And then you need a place for that data to live, and then you need the tooling to then feed that into, let's say, your machine learning model, or expose it to a large language model, describe it, annotate it appropriately. So there are different bits and pieces, and I think we're in a pretty good shape when it comes to the first part of that value chain, which is pretty well understood. And I think now the interesting bit is, now that we are at a level where that data is easily accessible, that's where the innovation is now moving, right? So how do you then put the ML on top of it? How do you put the AI on top of it? And that's where we are actively looking for folks that want to work with us to drive that forward. Yeah. So I think the first part is fairly straightforward, and now we can innovate on top of that.
But to get started hands-on, like we in academia, we are using, for example, you mentioned the LIMS systems which support animal. We use RSpace and free-to-use ELN. Are there any free-to-use ELNs which already exist to export animal files, or which can then be reused? Or what is a good starting point if I wanted to use animal?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, we really have to look at that entire chain, right? Because the ELN does have all the information you need. In the end, it's usually not that hard if you're starting from a structured data source. Yeah. And that's the question: is your ELN already structured, or is it more of and that leads to the question of data quality, right? Does your ELN, is that just a fancy spreadsheet, or is it more document oriented, or do you really have a strong data model that is there? So it's always a question of the data quality. Tooling, I think, is not the problem, and there's quite a bit of stuff, and obviously in this public forum, I don't want to mention particular tools and things, but it's more of a question of what's your source of data, what's the quality of the data, and then to kind of get into that pipeline.
Okay. Thank you.